Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us so early on beginning of an RSA. I'm John Miller. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Halcyon. We're the first dedicated anti-ransomware company. And today we're going to be talking about essentially one of the largest threats that's coming in the foreseeable future. I think we're all kind of struggling to understand the pace at which AI is coming and what it means going forward. What is AI going to look like 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years, 10 years from now? And how is it not only going to affect, the world at large, our days, but, we're at RSA Security. It's definitely evolving in an interesting way where I feel like it's coming very fast, but there are some use cases that are still coming slowly and not fully clear yet when they'll be, a lot like, quantum and blockchain. I think we're all really waiting to see those technologies land and change the world. I just want to thank you all as representatives of the global kind of cybersecurity industry for being here today and helping us kind of grasp these topics, and then hopefully create some new views with everyone in this room and spark new conversations with the people that you work with. I'd like to introduce our panel. I would love it if everyone would take a minute and just kind of go into their background and what really gets you excited about AI, starting with Teresa.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Teresa Payton. I'm the CEO of Fortalice Solutions. We're a cybersecurity and business intelligence operations company. And just by a quick way of background, I worked in the financial services industry for 16 years. So everything I do right or say right here, you can probably attribute to them. And then I worked for President George W. Bush, 2006 to 2008. And I was his chief information officer. And so if you don't like politics, if there's something I don't say today, maybe you can attribute it to that. I'm not a political. I focus more on technology and policy and what's the right thing to do. And the reason why I love the conversation we're having today about artificial intelligence is, for those of you who have been in technology or security for a long time, we've all been working on artificial intelligence, machine-based learning for many, many years. But as soon as we made it user-friendly, and we had ChatGPT and Bard and Google Gemini, as soon as it became user-friendly, it became sort of like the zeitgeist of consumers. And so I think it's an incredible opportunity for those of us who have been tirelessly working on emerging technologies for many years. And now we see sort of the consumerization of the technology. I think we've got this unique opportunity to figure out from a design perspective how to leverage it to the fullest while at the same time try to anticipate what cyber criminals and the misuse of technology may look like and put in the guardrails that we need to help us kind of battle the next wave of cybercrime.
Great. Yeah, awesome. Next, Jason.
Yeah, I'm Jason Clinton. I am the CISO at Anthropic. Anthropic is a frontier AI lab. We make Claude 3 Opus, which is currently the most powerful model, although that might change any day. This is a very dynamic space. I spent 11 years, almost 12 years at Google, most recently defending against nation-state actors on the Chrome infrastructure security team. Did a bunch of startups, been around tech for a long time, 25 years. The reason I'm excited about AI and the reason I decided to accept this role a year ago is I do believe it is maybe one of the most transformative technologies that we've seen since the Industrial Revolution, because it is economically valuable in the space of being able to make critical business decisions. And it's going to enable lots of interactions with the real world, and we'll talk about some of those as we go forward.
Awesome, Jeff.
Morning, everybody. Joe Zerba, FBI Cyber Division. I've been in the FBI about 15, 16 years now. Came up as an analyst in the counterterrorism days. Was down in Jacksonville, down in Charlotte, running the Intel program down there, and then was lucky enough to be able to come up here to Cyber Division, and extra lucky to be assigned the executive for responsible for the cyber threat actor stack within Cyber Division. So really trying to lean forward. What really makes me excited about this space is really government's not known for moving at the speed of light, but AI has forced our hand to do this, and we are leaning into this space. The government writ large, the FBI specifically, leaning into this innovation to really make sure that we can protect American innovation moving forward. So really honored to be on the panel.
Yeah, thanks for having you all here. I'm going to kick it off straight to Jason. And what I'm really interested in is your perspective on the speed of AI, right? Moore's Law, right? I think we're all familiar with that, has kind of gone away, and we're dealing with advancements in quantum, and everyone talks about it. And there's a lot of media, right? There's a lot of reporting on it, but I don't think there's anyone with the kind of exposure that you have being in the inside.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So since you brought up Moore's Law, I'll use that as an anchoring point. Moore's Law, for those of you who don't remember, every 18 months the density of the transistors on a chip will increase. That is not the case anymore. What's happening in AI though, there's this website, Our World in Data. It's a nonprofit that collates information from a lot of different sources that are sort of useful for policymaking. Has this graph of all of the compute that's gone into AI models since the 1950s. And if you put that thing up on your screen and you look and you draw a line through the amount of compute that's gone into AI models for the last 70 years of trend line that we have here, it's somewhere between 4 or 7x year over year increase in the amount of compute. And that's still holding, based on everything that I know and everything that I can see right now, we will have between 4 and 7x more powerful or more amount of compute models 12 months from now, and then I have 90% confidence that will be true in 24 months as well. Again, so somewhere between 16 and 50x amount of compute increase over the stuff that already exists. So we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff today that already exists, but that's not skating to where the puck is. We need to be planning for that massive increase in compute that's coming.
All right, I've got a follow-up for you. So I'm sure we're going to get into the negative sides of AI. The positive sides, as a CISO, what's coming out that excites you about doing your job better?
Yeah, I'll just give an example. I did my annual security strategy revamp just last week. And what I did is I took my 2023 security strategy document and I read into the context window everything that's happened in the last calendar year. So like all of our OKRs and all of our internal team docs. And I asked Claude to just write, and you could do this with any frontier model, write an updated strategy. So I wrote the strategy and then I asked it to write an updated threat model, wrote the threat model, and then finally I asked it for an updated risk matrix. And all of those things come out, about 80% complete. I needed to do about 20% editing to get out there. So that's, at least in my job, that's a huge productivity boost. There's like quantitative data that I can point to though, like companies that have fully adopted AI coding assistants are reporting somewhere between 30 and 70% performance improvement on the amount of code that their software engineers can output. Domains across legal or medical fields are definitely reporting these things. And also out of the box, these models are incredibly good at classification. So seeing an incredible amount of adoption on classification or on training these bespoke machine learning models that we've been working with before, using these frontier models as a sort of supervisor to train a narrow machine learning model. So a lot of adoption already, even with this the state that we're in. Yeah.
Cool, thanks. So over the last 30 years, and this is for Teresa, the government's put a lot of effort into essentially keeping up and figuring out how to regulate something that the policymakers normally don't understand. So people like you come in and you have this mission to kind of explain the context to everyone and try to get them to understand enough to make the right decision. How do you think that's going to play out with AI? I struggle to understand all of the future threats that come from AI, right? When I look into my crystal ball, what's going to happen 5 years from now. what do you think are going to be kind of the biggest challenges there of, not only working with government, but industry and academia to build something that works long term?
Yeah, I think it's really going to stretch our thinking on legislation. I mean, just based on the data points that you gave earlier, sort of the rapid pace that things go. I mean, think about the fastest laws you've seen passed at either a state or federal level, and probably it took a year, and it was probably something that sat in iterations in committee for years. So even if something moves quickly, it really didn't move that quickly. And we don't have the right construct in place today around our legislative framework. So my biggest advice to lawmakers at state and local levels and federal levels is to have a dynamic framework that is not text specific, that talks instead around what are the guardrails. So what are the ethical guardrails? Do I have an individual right to privacy when data is created and monetized about me? And so really creating those different guardrails that no matter where we are with our journey on quantum computing, on AI, cryptocurrency, whatever the different technologies are, that the laws can be dynamic and shape and shift. Because by the time we pass a law, it's already going to be outdated.
So normally in scenarios like this, you have corporations, right? Organizations like Anthropic that come in and work with, all branches of the government to help explain context. Not to say that it's self-serving to them, but it's very self-serving to the companies when they're trying to affect policy going forward. How do you think the consumers, like the actual individuals, are going to fare in this, right? Do you see it going more towards kind of corporate governments and, like you touched on, what happens to our data, right? Like the more that we embrace AI and use it, and we all know anything that makes your life easier, whatever the risk is, most people are willing to eat a lot of it, right, at the same time. And I am worried that, amongst all of the conversations of bias and the bigger AI picture, that the individuals will kind of get the short end of the stick. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, so I love what you said there, because I think we've got some constructs that we need to be pulling forward that we haven't thought about. Like we already know what the right thing to do here is. So for example, in banking, when we started automating, like truly automating our decision engines and writing the algorithms, and they were outperforming a traditional underwriter scenario. One of the things we had to commit to, both ethically as a company, but also by the way our regulators required it, was we had to show that we didn't have an unintentional bias against a certain demographic or a certain geography. And we had to demonstrate that we had championed challenger mode. So as we adopted this new technology and we adopted speed of decision making, because money in somebody else's hands for a lending decision or a deposit decision is what makes the world go round, right? Yeah. Money and love makes the world go round. And so we have that construct of proving we trust but verify, we have governance, we do champion challenger to make sure that we remove biases as we find them. So if you pull that forward into today's technology, just a real quick example of what it can mean to the consumer if we get it wrong. Working with a global insurance company, they were adopting chatbots in a pilot test and learn. In the pilot test and learn, the chatbots were outperforming all of the seasoned customer service agents and getting better customer delight scores. Once you got under the hood, because I asked a couple of key questions of the CIO, are these your engineers? Do they truly understand your business? Do they understand governance, make or checker rules? All of that was a no. And get underneath in that trust but verify, and what had happened was the chatbots had elevated each other's privileges. There was no make or checker rule anymore, and the data was being passed in the clear, unencrypted. So what could have the unintentional consequences been there? Thankfully, it was in a pilot test and learn. They did an incident response, no data leakage. One other thing I wanted to share, because I know statistics with leadership teams are really important, and these numbers will probably change, but I wrote them down so I wouldn't get them wrong. So PwC interviewed 4,700 CEOs, and they asked them, like, what are you concerned about in adopting AI technologies? So, and this doesn't equal 100%, it's not meant to, it's multiple questions, but 64% were worrying about cybersecurity risks of the 4,700. 46% were staying awake at night worried about legal liabilities. And then in a sort of a complementary research project by AICPA, despite all of the concerns, nearly 25% of all executives are like, the heck with it, let's just go do something to say we're doing something. So they haven't figured it out. So back to your answering your question, executives haven't figured it out. Our legal constructs haven't been figured out. So that's why it's up to all of us in this room to go back and say, what are our guardrails? How will we take care of the consumer? How will we take care of our companies? And how will we make sure things are done in an ethical, sustainable, really great way for innovation?
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump on that too from the FBI side. We're kind of luckily ahead of the curve there. Since 2021, we've had an AI Ethics Council, really bringing in key partners within the FBI, within DOJ to say, how does this really impact investigations, our relationship with the intel community, the governance, the ethics, all of the key partners. And it's not just within cyber division, it's not just within the science and technology branch, it's all of the key legal partners, it's victim services division, it's a lot of the OGC components, it's all the key players to make a holistic, conscious decision about any use of generative AI within the FBI and within investigation. So really stepping back to Teresa's point, driving that governance, driving that ethics, making sure that responsible implementation moving forward.
I mean, back to you, Joe. I've got another question. So essentially, I don't know how to put this eloquently. The FBI has served as the center of excellence for technology worldwide when it comes to law enforcement, right? It's the most technologically sophisticated, has the most scale, the most reach, and essentially pioneered computer crime and responding to computer crime. What's your vision or the FBI's vision when it comes to dealing with these threats going forward?
Yes, a great question. We've kind of laid out a strategy, three-pronged strategy to kind of drive the FBI's response to AI and how it can be used by both internally for the FBI to make sure that our agents are as empowered as possible, to make sure our investigations are as driven as possible, as efficient as possible, but also externally as well to make sure that we're able to interact and use whether big data, large language models to really make sure that we're following all of the key dialogue, all of the key constitutional guidance we have. So it's a three-prong approach. We dive into the intel collection, tracking, adversarial use of AI. This is almost to your point, John, the bread and butter of what the FBI does, just in a modern space. We've been doing this for over 100 years now of tracking adversaries going against breaking federal law. So this is nothing new to the FBI in that core sense, but it's completely new, and the leveraging of this data from the cyber defense side. Number two, protecting American AI innovation. So that's one of the key parts. We've been doing intellectual property protection for years, as Teresa knows, as just that partnership across with the private sector. You see it up here. You'll see it in, I believe we have 8 panels across, most of them involving private sector. That partnership to protect American AI and protect American innovation writ large is really what drives a lot of the FBI mission in that space. And that's not just cyber division, that's through our science and technology branch, our counterintelligence branch. Basically, the FBI writ large all has equity in that space. And third, ensuring ethical use. So that kind of goes back to the AI Ethics Council. That goes back to making sure that we have the right governance in place, the right training in place, and the right messaging internally in place to make sure that everyone's following kind of the guidance and governance that we set forth. Obviously, with the FBI, we've done a lot of high-profile cases, and with that, what's super important from our side is the data provenance behind it to make sure that we can go back through a prosecution and be able to identify where all the data came from that we made investigative decisions on. So kind of that three-prong approach is a strategy implemented across the FBI to make sure that we are making as conscious decisions as possible.
All right, follow up. What are your thoughts on the long-term kind of impact of adversarial AI. So adversarial AI as the, AI attacking AI. How do you arrest an AI?
Yes. Great question. I don't think that was on the prep, but that's fine.
Yeah.
We'll move it on. No, you don't. It's the threat actors behind that, and that's who the FBI has always been going after, whether it's terrorists post 9/11 in this new infrastructure space with generative AI, with large language models. They're being leveraged across the board by threat actors, right? You have phishing, the impact of just more effective phishing models, deep fakes. Living off the land is something that we're really focused on, how you can use large language models to kind of hide in the noise, whether that's through different fuzzing techniques or other kind of opportunities to really look at the core software pieces and what opportunities live in that, living off the land and hiding in the noise. But most important that I see is the scaling upside of the adversaries. Often the discussion is, hey, you can bring up the floor, and I think that's important. You can bring people that don't have a lot of cyber expertise and bring that floor up to really see, bring more people at a higher level operating in the cyber threat landscape. But what people don't often think about is the other side of that, the extremely high performing cyber threat actors that are out there, whether that's criminal, whether that's nation state, who are already at that high level. Where can these frontier models really open that aperture to drive that future innovation, and how do we stay competing and keep mitigating those threats? So it's bringing up the floor, but it's also focused on that high-end user, high-end cyber threat actors across the world, and how do we help mitigate that threat to protect American innovation.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so now we're on to the fun part, the threats, right? I'm going to start with you, Teresa, and the question is essentially, because AI is moving so fast and you have these foundational models that are just changing whenever they get to it, do you think that we're going to get to a point where technology outpaces the ability to pass legislation? Because of that long time to get something passed, will we get to a point that by the time it's done, it's not relevant anymore?
I think we're there, candidly. I mean, you've got a couple of things not working in our favor. One, it's an incredibly complex thing to explain how enterprise architecture and how technology works today. And I think we have to make sure those of us in the technology community, we learn to kind of back up and really focus on human user stories and really storyboard, here's how technology is integrated into the human user stories, so that when we do meet with lawmakers, we can tell it in a relevant context that sort of is in the physical realm, something that they can experience or think, or they know somebody in their kind of their elected base, their citizens, it could happen to them. So I think we've got to do a better job of really backing up and talking about the technology in the context of human user stories, both the good and then the bad, being deployed, being misused. Because the technology itself isn't bad, it's the misuse of technology that's bad.
Do you think that we'll get to a spot where the politicians completely stop reading legislation or generating it and just interact with an LLM instead, and have the LLM explain it and translate?
I mean, it could be an interesting way if you think about efficiency. So we've been talking very much around efficiencies in fighting crime, efficiencies in business.
Legislation's confusing.
Right.
I think we can all agree with that.
All case precedent, all case law, and we put it into an LLM. Can you work with us on that?
Yeah.
And then
Patent pending, right? We're seeking funding at the end of this talk. All right, Joe, this is a fun one. What bad guys out there, like individuals, or is it going into the drug cartels? Or, I mean, I know that the ransomware cybercrime guys are starting to use AI. But do you have any examples of where AI is being used in a way that's on the FBI's radar?
Yeah, we've got a lot of kind of examples that we've pushed through. And then I want to flag too, the private sectors, a lot of this key reporting is coming out through a lot of the frontier models, a lot of the large players in this space are pushing threat intel out at a pace I have not seen in my 15, 16 years of working in the intel field. So really appreciate kind of that partnership and that transparency with the private sector to say, hey, this is universally a concern across. And if we don't get ahead of this today, the opportunity window, the speed that this technology, and I think that's a key part too, the speed that this technology is really developing is epic across just the world really, but specifically in America, and making sure that we're protecting that innovation here is what really kind of drives that next step. And again, I keep going back to the government piece, like you see it with all of the proposed legislation, all of the EOs going out there. Like this is moving at kind of to Teresa's point from the legislative, from the policy side at a pace that's extremely fast too. And there's risk with moving fast, but the rewards are too great to pass on that risk. So we are really kind of driving the threat actors to make them aware as possible through the transparency side. We've done a lot of work, the Bureau specifically with CISA, with the Five Eyes, to bring out a lot of production. So there's a ton of JCSAs, basically our production on this to tell that story. That story is really important of how threat actors are using it. So you can see it doesn't just apply to the large language models, it applies to basically everyone in here across all critical infrastructure and non-critical infrastructure. The leveraging of LLMs is a threat and to your point about, I want to identify nation state as more or cyber criminal as more, they're all at this upper level leveraging of it. Kind of the way I paint that picture is everyone you hope or you say, hey, I really wish they weren't using generative AI. They are. Everyone's exploring this. These are high-end groups that really want to leverage this, and it's a new, just as it's a new tool for us from the government side and from the private sector side, it's a brand new tool to them, and they are fully leveraging it to make their attacks and achieve their goals in the most efficient way possible.
Love it. All right, Jason, are you ready for a softball? I'm gonna lobby a good one.
All right.
How are LLMs changing the threat landscape?
Yeah, this is a long answer, but I think it's important to cover some stuff that we haven't talked about yet. So both Teresa and Joe have alluded to the run-of-the-mill cyber criminal adoption of this. So this manifests in some of the old ways that we've seen cybercrime play out, especially in the financial sector on BEC, where there is usually a kingpin who sort of has a lot of technical capability, and then they're using like Discord or some other platform like Telegram to sell their wares to other sort of like low-skilled cyber criminals who are sort of doing the financial fraud and that kind of thing. So in many of those cases, they're using open weights models, which we haven't talked about yet. I'm happy to talk about that if we want to. But they're also, in some cases, finding some of these more powerful models and sort of like finding ways around the safety controls. And so it's incumbent on all of the frontier labs, especially in that space, to be ahead of the trust and safety problem of like doing threat hunting, knowing the threat intel, shutting down those abusive vectors, and making sure that these platforms aren't being used for that financial crime, but also election interference. It's an election year, monitoring for election-related activity on those kinds of platforms and looking for malign foreign influence, taking activity there and cracking down on that. All of the frontier labs have election policies to sort of make sure that we're not doing that. So Anthropic's no different. I just want to skate to where the puck is again. Sorry to keep using that metaphor, but 12 months, 24 months, everything's going to be more powerful, and I just want to preview some things that everybody in this room needs to know about. For example, in August, Google published a post on using a large language model for automatic vulnerability discovery using the existing cluster fuzz architecture. The technical details don't matter here, but the most important thing to take away from that, and they've since done an update in December, is that large language models are incredibly capable of going through software and finding those vulnerabilities, especially in the open source side. And if you're thinking about nation state level of activity, that you can see why that would be very interesting for them.
I love to think of Grammarly, right?
Yeah.
Like the whole point of Grammarly is somebody writing something. It finds the bugs in there in their text and fixes it.
Yeah.
It's the same concept with code vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah.
It's a mistake that somebody made, and the second you can
Right.
find that automatically.
Yeah, we have. So it's not all bad. We have a defender domination right now. Like I said, the Googles and other cybersecurity players in the world are adopting this sort of technique of trying to find software vulnerabilities as fast as possible. So if you're in the audience today and you're thinking like, okay, what do I need to do to prepare for this 12 to 24 months from now? And I think it's like 6 to 18 months on the vulnerability discovery side. Everybody needs to have a one-day patch deployment policy in place. When those vulnerabilities are discovered by the defenders, we need to get the patches out as fast as possible, because we have to assume that these very sophisticated nation-state actors are also doing that. I guess another thing to call out on the cyber side here is that just broadly speaking, as these things do get more powerful, they will be able to author incredibly sophisticated attack chains, the kinds of things that might involve subagents. Subagents we also haven't talked about yet. There's a lot there. These things can sort of call other AIs, so they can recruit AIs into sort of a collective of decision makers, and they can go make fake social media profiles, or they can go target and case your employees and find the most vulnerable parties, and this can be done completely automatically. And so it's very, very important that we think about the threat landscape changing from these perspectives, and all of the foundation model providers are doing the appropriate trust and safety controls to crack down on that.
Are the current versions of LLMs truly effective at doing that, or do we need a new generation that's more oriented around source code than human language?
Yeah, they're already effective, and it's really just a question of the amount of compute that you're willing to spend to discover right now. So the most powerful models are expensive to execute. They're very large, and the amount of memory and the number of machines that you have to have in order to run them. Like, let's use the Linux kernel as an example. Hundreds of millions of lines of code across the entire open source ecosystem. When you have something that large, and you're trying to do an analysis for looking for novel security vulnerabilities, if you're asking the large language model, look at this section of code and tell me if there's a vulnerability there, and then you have to do it for each class of vulnerability currently, it's incredibly financially resource constrained at the moment. But it will change. As I said, like all the capabilities that exist today, they will get cheaper just as a benchmark. Like the amount of compute that is required to achieve the same level of performance of Claude today for Sonnet, which is our middle model, is equivalent to a 9x amount of compute 12 months ago. So you can see how like the intelligence is getting faster, and the amount of hardware that's available for these things is getting faster.
Cool. So and it's sophomoric. When I think about it in LLMs and the threat that they pose, my head immediately goes to phishing.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it gives the attacker the ability to not only automate the process over again, but make it so correct it's almost perfect, right? What has essentially confused me a little bit with that is, now that the quality of phishing is going up because of LLMs, Mandiant recently put out a report where they said that phishing is going down for ransomware attacks. The way over, I think it was the last year, the last quarter, the prevalence in 0 days to compromise networks over credentials more than doubled. Do you think that the use of 0 days is being driven by the attackers effectively using AI? Like, is phishing going down and 0 days going up because they're doing exactly what you said? They're using AI now to discover these 0 days? Or is it more of they've built a large global economy now where people are selling them to them? Or?
Yeah, I think the global economy is probably the bigger indicator at the moment. I don't know if Teresa, if you want to jump in here, but I do feel like the criminal networks haven't caught on to what I'm talking about yet, but maybe you're seeing something similar.
I would agree. I mean, I think it's one of those things where they study human nature, and so they're always looking for the easy way in, and then wash, rinse, repeat. And so if they've got something right now that's working where they can take advantage of 0 days, great. But as maybe some of the more elite units of nation states have some of the
absolutely.
capabilities that you're talking about, but the cyber criminal syndicates, they're leveraging AI mostly to do the social engineering tactics and, hey, I'm targeting somebody in Texas, so do it in the tone of Matthew McConaughey when you send the email or whatever. So they're using it typically, that way, as well as looking for unpatched vulnerabilities. I mean, they get the same bulletins we do, and they just reverse engineer, and they're looking for that. But what you're talking about, I think only the most elite units
Today,
have that capability.
Yep.
So
now.
Teresa, to you, most executives know the difference between a 3-wood and a 5-wood, and when they should lay up on a golf course and stuff like that. When it comes to going deep into technology, very few executives understand enough to really get everything in context, right? To get a clear understanding to make an effective decision. What's your advice on explaining the threat to executives that possibly have lower than needed intelligence?
Yeah, so what I would say is don't use the fear, uncertainty, and doubt motto, because that dog doesn't hunt anymore. So don't use that with the executives. It really has to be, to me, where cybersecurity gets the most funding and the most priority is when the person coming in can give a business case that again talks about customer delight, meeting the mission, vision, and execution of operations, whether you're in government or private sector. And so if you can start talking about how your cybersecurity maturity roadmap actually enables productivity, enables a better customer experience, and oh, by the way, it meets these regulatory requirements, and oh, by the way, battles the coming threats at us, it's almost as if you have to have that be a necessary but secondary part of your conversation. If you show that you can, and this is a very old example, but there was a lack of adoption of mobile banking at one of the large banks that I worked at, so I won't name which one. And when we did the demographic voice of the customer analysis, there was a demographic that said, you have scared me so much that I'm gonna end up at a phishing site and I'm not gonna be on my real banking site, that I just don't wanna adopt this. And so they came up out of that focus group with basically, you got to pick your own picture and a passphrase that went with the picture, and you would be presented that, and that's how you would know you were at the right bank. Did that inherently make that whole construct safer? Not necessarily, but it helped with adoption, and at the same time, it did help people know I am at the right banking site. So it did elevate security in the end. So I think that's where our conversations have to go. And also demonstration. So if you have an opportunity, if it's not a tool, if the tool's engineering ugly and it's not something you can show to an executive, then use visualization. There's so many tools out right now that you can do data visualization of what you're talking about, go in with the picture, go in with the story, and you will get the prioritization and the funding.
Cool. Jason, similar question to you, only the context is, I would imagine the executives that you talk to at work, hyper-technical, right? Do you use the same approach when you're trying to?
There's a couple things to say here. So let's start with the kind of concerns that you tend to hear from executive C-suite. Like, is my data going to be used for training? That's probably the number one question. Is my AI model that I'm adopting going to leak customer data to the places it's not supposed to go? And in many ways, exactly the way that we've thought about data governance before now is exactly the way that executive C-suite should be thinking about it. So know where your data is, know what your systems are connected to, do those isolations and do those compartments so that you don't have AIs from different vendors all being used across your company in ways that aren't segmented. So important questions to ask. There's lots of things too that I think people don't realize about what's happening in the cloud security provider space and the AI as a service space. And so just to give an example, Anthropic is a 3-year-old company, and we have a bunch of compliance certifications, but there's no way in the world that we would have as many compliance certifications as AWS or GCP do. So what we have done is we've made our model available on those cloud providers. You can have a relationship with the cloud provider and run our model, and you never talk to Anthropic at all. We never see your prompts. It's just a relationship between you and the cloud service provider. And this is true for any number of parties in this place. You can do this on Azure with OpenAI. You can do it with Hugging Face or with Scale or Cohere. All of these different providers sort of have these guarantees that you can get to make sure that you're not having your data be trained on. The other thing to mention is from the C-suite perspective, when we do deployments, there's this opportunity to approach the threat landscape from a defender increasing side, and so we talked about phishing. I really believe that there's going to be an opportunity to use large language models to augment our ability to detect the kinds of problems that we're facing, not only on the phishing side, so you can see in the browser or in the email client immediately, this looks suspicious based on analysis, but then on SIM analysis and on detection and response on all of these different opportunities where you're looking at threats coming in to your environment, you are giving your SOC analysts a huge augmentation in their ability to be successful in that defense.
All right. If you're looking 12 months from now,
Yep.
and there's one thing that if you could call it out, the industry would do it, just whatever you say, it's adopted, that you think we really need to have done 12 months from now that doesn't exist? What's your...
So I'll cheat and give two answers. One, I already said, if you're not even in AI, please get a one-day patch deployment process in place in your enterprise. It's going to be extremely important.
So to hit on that, what do you do to the execs that are like, well, I'm worried the patches could break something, like, shouldn't we give it a week or two, make sure everything's okay?
I mean, so many people at this point have adopted SaaS. I think you should be asking your vendors, can they do that? Like the software that they're providing to your enterprise, are they reacting to new threats and what they're offering? The second thing I'll mention is, this is you said a wish to achieve in 12 months. On the policy side, it's going to be super important. I'm glad that you brought up the banking example earlier. It's going to be important for us to have auditors. If we can't write regulation fast enough to keep up with this technology, I think we should adopt the sort of framework, or maybe think about a framework where it's similar to the financial industry, where there are accredited auditors. Right. They come in, they look at your AI deployment. You can get a certification potentially from your foundation provider that says that they've followed certain things on ethics and they've done the right things on trust and safety that I talked about earlier. And then if you just decide to deploy in your environment, there's ISO 42K1, which is being drafted right now. There's the Cloud Security Alliance has a new specification here. There's lots of opportunities for auditing to really circumscribe the dangers and the outside problems. And I think like 12 months from now, if we have auditing everywhere, that'd be thumbs up.
Great answer. All right, Joe.
All right.
It's to you. AI is bringing all sorts of new threats. Do you think the FBI, and I guess you specifically, are you nervous for it? Do you guys have it handled, or what are the biggest advancements that you want to see from your organization to stay ahead of the threat?
Yeah, I'm nervous and excited. So I'm from the nervous side. Look, you don't know what these cyber threat actors are going to do 6 months from now, 12 months from now. I'm not sure, arguably, and potentially Jason would concur, what the threat landscape even looks like a year from now. We're using our best, most informed analysis to paint that picture to our executives of being where we should be going and where we think those threat actors are going. And then from the federal side, obviously this budgeting is 2-3 years out. So where we should be asking for those line items, where that budget should be coming from, especially within cyber division. We have a lot of competing priorities within cyber division. How does AI fit into those, and how can it help with those efficiencies across? And then to the previous point about executive buy-in, it's about driving that appetite. Like within the Bureau, I mean, the Director Reyes testified just about AI back in 2022 about kind of the big data problem that a lot of companies have, but also that the federal government has, and how we can kind of leverage the data behind internally to to really make sure that we are in the best baseline moving forward to build those investigations to effectively use the taxpayer money in the best way to drive mitigation and protect American innovation.
Awesome. All right. One final question for Teresa. You know, as leaders in the industry, as individuals that help affect and direct the security decisions of our organizations, how do we help future-proof those, right? Especially in something that's changing in a way where, I guess Jason's got it figured out, but outside of him,
Thank you,
nobody's
Jason.
really sure what it's going to be.
Yeah, so on future proofing, again, I'm going to go back to those human user stories and really understanding where does technology play a role, either in sort of in front of the transaction, during the transaction, and post-transaction. Because if we understand those human user stories and the processes around them, now I'm going to give you a little twist to this. So cyber criminals know exactly how business processes work, right? So we forget about human user stories. They could teach a master class in human behavior. So they know how a wire transfer process works. And so the way you throw them off their track is not just through technology, it's also out-designing them. And so what we're going to have to do as this is evolving and their tactics and techniques are evolving is just give them a little twist of something they didn't expect. They're not going to see it coming, and they're going to have to move on to the next one. I'll give you like a quick, super simple example. When it comes to wire transfers, they know that there's typically a protocol around CEO, CFO. They have a conversation back and forth, and maybe sometimes they'll get on a video conference call. We already know somebody fell prey to deep fakes on a video conference call. You can create a passphrase, a rotating passphrase that's not easily guessed by looking on social media, and you can have everybody use that passphrase. And if they don't get the passphrase right, money doesn't get transferred. Is that hackable? Of course it is. But what I'm trying to do is give you these different examples of how to out-design, out-think, and outsmart the cyber criminals. The second thing, if there's anybody here that is working anywhere in biometrics, we are so dependent in our multi-factor authentication layers on biometrics, and biometrics have been stolen, and they will be reproduced at mass and scale that we haven't seen before, making multi-factor authentication inherently weaker. So for those of you working in biometrics, if you can be thinking, I'm getting my wish here, I'm putting my wish out there. If you can be thinking about sort of the idea of, is it real or is it Memorex? How can you authenticate a voice print, a thumbprint, a handprint, an iris print? How can you authenticate that it is the original real McCoy and not a recording of the real thing? So if you can do that, then you're going to help us have a stronger multi-factor authentication. But multi-factor authentication right now, I think, is our weakest link, because we've convinced all the executives this is the way to go. So if all else fails, at least we've got multi-factor authentication. And now with the technology in the hands of people who will misuse it, biometrics will actually be a problem for us. So those would be my two things.
Awesome.
I love that.
We are out of time, unfortunately. I've done probably 10 AI panels, so in the last year or so. This one by far the best. I am a little concerned that it might be the best because I wasn't answering questions at it, but that's fine.
You did an awesome job
That's
moderating.
fine. For anyone that enjoyed Teresa, she's talking directly after this. You can just follow her. Everyone else, if you have questions, you can feel free to speak with us outside, but unfortunately we do all have to, us included, get up and leave the room for the next reset. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.